Hello everyone, welcome back to my systemic functional linguistic series. And today we are going to talk about a system in systemic functional linguistics or the systemic functional grammar to analyze the experiential meaning in a clause, which is the transitivity system. As usual, let's see what the video will cover. First, we will visit the ideational metafunction, and then we come to what does the transitivity mean. I will also introduce to you the basic terms in the transitivity system, including the process, the participant, and the circumstance. And we will go deeper to the process types and the participant roles. And the last one, we will see different types of circumstances because there are a lot of things to cover in this video. Let's begin. Okay, so if you still remember about the relational metafunction, it is the function of language to represent the experiences of reality and how those experiences are logically connected. And it focuses on the function of language to create what we call ideational meaning. So if you look at the image here, ideational metafunction or ideational meaning is divided into two main types. It is the experiential meaning and the logical meaning. The logical meaning, I remember that we have discussed the taxis and logical semantic relation. The taxis consist of two taxes, which are the parataxis and hypotaxis. They are basically the relationship between two or more clauses, like coordinating, like main clauses and main clauses, and I'm sorry, I mean a main clause and another main clause are coordinated in a clause complex, and semantic relation or logical semantic relation refers to the semantic relationship between those clauses, whether uh, the relationship is projection or expansion. I think you will need to refer to the previous video about clause boundaries. Okay, but in this video we will focus on the experiential meaning uh, or how experience is transmitted or transformed into language, and we will use the transitivity system to analyze the experiential meaning in the clause. According to Halliday, we use language to represent three main experiences: the inner experiences, or what we experience inside ourselves, which is referred to as the mental process, and the outer world, our experience or of out the reality in the outer world, which is referred to as a material process, and the relationships between things or entities in the world, which is referred to as the relational process. But there are some sub experiences between mental and material process. There is the behavioral process. Between the mental and relational processes, we have a verbal process, and between relational and material processes, we have existential processes. So there are at least six processes in the transitivity system. So what is transitivity itself? So if you refer to the traditional grammar, the term transitivity relates to the connection or the relationship between verbs and noun phrases. For example, we have some verb which requires uh, requires objects. We call them uh, transitive verb, and then those which do not require object, we call them intransitive verb, and some verbs are called polytransitive because they require more than one object. But in SFL, the transitivity uh, means something different. The term transitivity, comes from the idea of passing across, like transport, something like that, okay, or transferring the meaning. So transitivity in this case means how experience is transmitted or represented through language or clause. The transitivity system then means how speakers and writers make grammatical choice to represent different kinds of experience, whether it is uh, their inner experience, outer experience, the experience of outer world, or the process between those words. Okay. All right. There are three basic terms in the transitivity system. The first one is the process, referring to the happenings or the goings on, which relies through the verbal group in the clause. Imagine that someone is telling you, trust the process. So in this case, the process means anything which happens in your life, whether it is what people say, what people think about you, what you do, what people do, what happens around you, and etc. Those are processes. Okay? Then the participants refers to the entities involved in the process, which are realized through the nominal group. And entities are not necessarily humans, but also objects, as long as they are involved in the process, whether as a subject, object, or something else. And then the circumstance. The circumstance is the environment of the process, the environment in which the process takes place. Okay? And the circumstance is realized through the adverbial group and prepositional phrase. So you can look at basic example here. The clause those students are writing their essays in the library. So those students and their essays are the participants are writing something they do or something happens is the process. In the library, in this case, is the circumstance, especially the circumstance of location, more specifically, the location in terms of place. Now, we come to the process types and participant roles. We begin with the material process. The material process functions to represent action, event, or happening. The key participants are the actor, beneficiary, goal, and or range. Why and or here? Because they are almost similar, but actually they are different. Yeah. In traditional grammar, goal or range may be considered as object, but SFL uh, looks at the object of the verb in more detail. So, what are the differences? The difference is this: the goal, if the participant is affected or created by action, it undergoes changes based on the actions or the process. Meanwhile, the range functions to define the scope or the domain of the process, but it is not affected or changed by the action or the process. Alright, now look at these examples. And I want to tell you that I have provided a supplementary file, a PDF file actually, uh, which consists of uh, which contains the examples of the processes. Yeah. So the examples that I display in this video are just limited to save some space. Well, let's take a look at the first example. The students are writing their essays in the library. This example is similar to the previous examples. Okay, so those students here, the participant, the actor. Yeah, so the role of the participant is the actor. The process is the material, and their essays is as the participant. The role is a goal, not range, but goal. Why? Because goal affected or created by action. In this case, the process of writing creates the essays, or the essays uh, are the results of the process writing. Okay, and in the library is the circumstance, the location, more specifically the place. Okay, the second example, they sang the national anthem melodiously. Okay, in this example, they is the actor, sang, the past tense of sing, uh, is the material process, and national anthem is the range. Why it is not a goal? Because the national anthem, the song, is not effective, okay, and not created by the process singing or sung here. Okay? Uh, whether they sung melodiously or not, the song itself is not effective. Melodiously, in this adverbial group, is the circumstance of manner. We will see the types of circumstances at the end of this video. And then the last example here. Research has been conducted in this area. The research here is range. Why it is not goal? Because research is what has been conducted. It is not something created, but it is the domain of the process. So what they are doing? They are doing research. Okay, so research is the domain of the process, the scope of what people do. Okay, so it is range, not goal. Has been conducted is the material process, and in this area in the circumstance, location, place. So material process is about um, actions, something people do. Okay, an action, event, or happiness in the material world. Alright, now relational process. Relational process functions to describe the relationship between participants. Okay, there are two modes of the relational process. The first one is the attributive or the attributive relational process, which assign a quality to a participants, and the second one is the relational identifying process, which defines or identifies the or equates the participants with something else. Yeah. In each type, in each mode, there are three types. The first one is intensive, which expresses a quality or identity; circumstantial, which expresses location, time, accompaniment; and possessive, which expresses the ownership or possession. Okay? We will see the examples here, but you can see more examples in the supplementary file. So the participants in the relational process are these. For the relational process, we have the carrier and the attribute. And while for the relational identifying process, we have token and value, like this. Qualitative research is useful. Here, the clause uh, gives an attribute to qualitative research, and the attribute is useful. Qualitative research is the carrier of the attribute, and useful is the attribute. And the relational process here is the verbal group is. Okay, and then the second one, a case study is an example of a qualitative method. Here, a case study is not a carrier but a token. Okay, and the value is an example of a qualitative method. So, what is the difference? The difference is that the first clause, in the first clause, we attribute qualitative research as a useful thing, but in the second clause, we equate a case study with an example of a qualitative method. We identify a case study as an example of qualitative method, okay? Or we define a case study as an example of qualitative method. Please see more examples in the supplementary file. And then the mental process. So the mental process functions to represent our inner experience, including what we perceive, uh, things, what we think, desire, like, knowing, feeling, believe, and so on and so forth. The participants includes the sensor, which must be a conscious participant like humans, and the phenomenon or the things that we sense. There are several subtypes of the mental process, including perceptive, cognitive, desiderative, and emotive. Okay, let's take a look at these two examples. We observe change in students' motivation. Here, We is the sensor. Okay? Observe is the mental process. Perceive. Observe, because observe means seeing. Yeah? So we see something. We perceive using our sensory perceptions, eyes. Okay? But it also apply, applies to we listen to, like that. We feel. They are all mental processes. Okay? And change in students' motivation is the phenomenon, something that is observed. Okay? The second one, the teacher thinks that it is the best method. Okay? Here, the teacher is the sensor, thinks is the process, the mental or cognitive process, because things is something happened in our cognitive space, our mind. And here, the phenomenon is this embedded clause that it is the best method. So if you look uh, at this clause based on the taxes or the clause complex system, we will say that this clause, this embedded clause, is the content of the verb things, the verbal group things. Okay, but based on the or in terms of the transitivity system, we call it the phenomenon. So the phenomenon can be an embedded clause. Okay, that is the mental process. Alright, verbal process representing the process of saying. The participants include the sayer or who says, verbiage. Verbiage is the content, what is said. And then the receiver. The receiver is the participants who receive the saying, and the target. The target is the participant which is talked about, like that. Okay, we can see some subtypes of verbal process: general saying, reporting, commending, questioning, and evaluating. And in the parentheses, you can see the common verbs to use in each subtype. Okay, the example here, the first one. She told her friends a secret. Okay? She here is the sayer, told is the verbal process, her friends is the receiver, and a secret is a verbiage. Okay? Verbiage. Scholars reported that students preferred teacher feedback. As you can see, this is an embedded clause, but in terms of the participant role, this is a verbiage. It is the content of what is reported. Okay, and who report is the sayer. The second one here, the third one, they criticize the policy. Now, in this example, the policy is the target, something which is being criticized. Okay, and while they is the sayer, criticize is the verbal process. So criticize means that we use language, right? We use language to criticize. We say something or we write something about the policy. So that is a verbal process. Alright, so now the behavioral process. The behavioral process representing physiological and psychological behavior. Things people do physically as a result of mental or emotional states, Like when we smile, smile is a physical, uh, smile is physical, but it represents our uh, mental state or emotional state, or for example, being happy, the feeling of being happy. The participants here, we have behavior and phenomenon. But as usual, if they are in parentheses, means that they are optional depending on the clause. For example, he smiled. He is the behavior, okay? Meanwhile, smiled is the process, the behavioral process. The students listen to the explanation. Uh, the students here behavior. Listened is the behavioral process, and to the explanation is the phenomenon. Alright, now why listen is a behavioral process, uh, not a mental process, because the clause here represent what students seems to do, what the student seems to do, that they listen, that they pay attention. Physically, they listen to something. Okay, so that is the behavioral process. Okay, but listen, listen, if the verb in the clause is used to represent what someone is doing, which is perceiving a sound, then it is a mm, mental process, perceptive. Okay, because it is related to the perception, sensory perception. Okay, and then they took a deep breath. They took a deep breath. They behavior took is the process, the behavioral process. Meanwhile, a deep breath is the behavior. Okay, so the behavior here, we have the participant behavior when the behavior is separated from the process. Okay, like here, smile is the process itself, but here the process is took, taking, yeah, a deep breath, but the behavior is a deep breath, like that. Okay, alright. Now is the existential process. So the existential process functions to represent the existence or occurrence of something. The participant, there is only one participant actually in this process, that is what exists, which is called the existent, the entity or event that exists or happens. There are main, there are two subtypes and in this process. The first one is the entity existential, referring to the existence of an entity, object, or a phenomenon, whatever it is, something static. And the second one is the eventive existential, which refers to the existence of an event or happening, something dynamic, something unfolding in the process. Okay, this clause often begins with an existential there, like there is a blah blah blah, there are, there were, there was, they are uh, grammatical subjects that introduce the clause, the existential process, but they are not participants. Okay, the the participant is just the entity or the event, and they are called existent. Let's look at the example. There were debates among scholars. Here, the verbal group where is the existential process, in this case is entity, and the entity or the existent is the debates. Here among scholars is the circumstance. These clauses, these two clauses may share similar meaning, but they are different. Okay? Debates emerged from those different perspectives. We can change this circumstance to be into among scholars as well. Debates emerge among scholars. But in this second example, debates is a dynamic event, something that unfolds. Okay, unfolds. It is not a static thing, but a dynamic thing. So debates emerge. We can see the verb emerge means something unfolds. Okay, so it is not an entity but an event. Okay, so here the debates is the event, the existence, emerge is the process, the existential process, eventive, and from those different perspectives is the circumstance, in this case, is the circumstance of cause. Alright, now we look at the types of circumstances. Circumstances add extra information about the process. They are typically realized by verbal groups or prepositional phrases, and sometimes they can also be realized through clauses as well. In systemic functional linguistics, there are 9 major types of circumstances, and most of them have their subtypes. So we can see the list here. There is the circumstance of the extent, location, manner, cause, contingency, accompaniment, role, matter, and angle. Okay, now we look at each of them. In these samples, in these examples, the bold face uh, are the circumstance. Okay, the first one is the circumstance of extent, which functions to describe how far, how long, or how many times the process happens. Distance deals with how far. For example, they walked for 2 miles. Here, the for 2 miles is the circumstance of the extent. In this case, is the distance. The second one is the extent of duration, the circumstance of duration, which describes how long the process takes place. The instruction lasted for 3 months. Here, this part for 3 months is the circumstance of duration, and then frequency, how many times, uh, like they meet twice a week. This is basically the adverb of frequency, and then location. Location, the circumstance of location describes the time and the place uh, where the process happens. Place answers to question where, and time answers to the question when. And manner describes how the process is carried out. It consists of the means, by what means the process is carried out. Like students submitted their essays by email. So by email here is the means by which their essays are submitted, were submitted. Okay? The quality, or in what way, like the adverb clearly here, is the quality of the explanation. So the explain here is the process. Okay, verbal. It can be a verbal process here. It can explain because it uh, requires the use of verbal communication. And then the comparison, compare the process. Okay, like Group A performed better than Group B. So here, better than Group B, uh, com compared is a circumstance of comparison in which the performance of Group B is compared to the performance of Group A. Degree, or to what extent, uh, yeah, I think it is self-explanatory. Just look at the example here where the adverb significantly describes the degree of the development. In this clause, students' writing developed significantly. So the circumstance degree here, significantly here, describes the degree of the students' writing development. Now, the circumstance of cause describes why the process happens. Okay, so we have the first one, the reason, which is the why itself, like this. They left because of the noise. Okay, also the purpose, for what? They studied to pass the test. Okay, so to pass the test is the purpose of study. Meanwhile, the noise is the reason why they left. Okay, so they are different. So there is a difference between the reason, the purpose. The next one is behalf. On what behalf? He spoke on behalf of the group. So in this case, he is part of the group and represent the group in the process of speaking. Okay, so that is the circumstances of uh, behalf. Contingency describes the conditions, concessions, and restrictions of the process. Okay, so the circumstances of the process, like the condition itself, the condition as the circumstance, like the student is allowed to participate if, so the keyword is if he signs the consent form. Meanwhile, the concession, we can see here, despite the task difficulty, they completed the test on time. So the task difficulty is actually a restriction to complete the test on time, but it is considered. Okay, so we can find other examples like although. Yeah, although the task is difficult, they completed the test on time. Okay, so that clause has the first clause. Although the task is difficult, has a, a circumstantial function in the complex clause. But here we focus on the group level. Okay, So despite the task difficulty is a group level, not a class level, and function as the circumstance of contingency, especially the concessions. And then default. I don't know why Holiday uses this word, this term, but it describes the necessary conditions, yeah, in what needed condition that a process takes place. Like the teacher still guided the students when necessary. Yeah. So in this example, when necessary is the circumstance of the contingency, more specifically the default. Okay, and then accompaniment. Accompaniment describes who or what is with or without something in the process, the participants. Okay, like she came with her friends. So with her friends is the circumstance of accompaniment, in which means that her friends her, accompany the participant here. She, yeah? He worked without any support. Yeah? So without any support. So accompaniment is not only concerned with with, but also without. And then the circumstance of role shows the capacity or role in which a process happens. The first one is guys. Yeah? As what? Students work as participants of the study or in the study or in that study. Okay? Students work as participants. Here, students take the role as participants. And then the second one is the product, resulting in what? For example, they develop the outline into an essay. Okay, so the process developed or developing the outline resulting the resulting in the essay. Okay, now the circumstance of matter indicates what the class is about in terms of content or topic. Like the students ask about the assignment. So about the assignment is the content or the topic of the process asked. Okay, and then angle. Angle gives the source of the viewpoint, statement, or opinion. Okay, like according to the data, the results improved. According to the data is the circumstance in which the data is the source of the viewpoint. I'm sorry, to the data, yeah, the viewpoint for the statement or opinion, the results improve. Also, in this example, in the teacher's view, this method works. In this clause, the teacher's view is the source, okay? And the statement opinion is this method works. So that's all. Yeah? I know that there are lots of things to learn, to understand, and practice when we learn the transitivity system to analyze the experiential meaning transmitted or transformed into clauses. So I hope that this video can help you, at least it introduces to you how the transitivity system looks like. Well, actually this is also challenging topic, task, or concept for me too. And I'm still learning, and I hope that we can learn together. So if you have a question or correction, maybe you can let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, hopefully.